There is something fascinating about looking back and realizing that certain figures weren't just men or women of their time. They were antennas tuned to frequencies we are only beginning to understand today. And one of them, perhaps the most impactful of all, was someone who lived 2 millennia ago in a land forgotten by Rome, yet remembered by billions to this day. Jesus. We are not talking here about the dogmatic religious figure or the symbol institutionalized by centuries of interpretations, rituals, and ecclesiastical power. We're talking about the man, the archetype, the living myth whose existence echoes not only in sacred texts, but in the deep structures of the human mind. What if I told you that this man, or rather, this embodied energy, understood laws of reality that modern science is still trying to decipher? That he didn't just walk on water, multiply loaves, or raise the dead, but that all of this was merely the visible tip of a much larger iceberg? An iceberg made of consciousness, intention, and perhaps, yes, perhaps the mastery over quantum energy itself? Have you ever stopped to think that many of the miracles attributed to Jesus might sound familiar to a modern quantum physicist? Healing from a distance? Physics tells us that particles can be entangled regardless of distance. Turning water into wine? Something as simple as rearranging molecules if you have access to the right code. Walking on water? Perhaps a temporary alteration of matter's density or polarity. Sounds absurd? Maybe. But no more absurd than saying matter can be both a wave and a particle depending on who observes it. Quantum physics doesn't just question objective reality. It suggests that consciousness directly influences the behavior of matter. What if Jesus wasn't just a spiritual master, but someone who intuitively mastered this connection between thought and reality? Someone who understood that faith isn't just belief, but a form of energy capable of altering vibrational patterns. Someone who saw the world not as a collection of separate objects, but as a web of invisible relationships, where everything is connected and nothing happens by chance. Imagine a man who knew this, who didn't need equipment, formulas, or laboratories because his entire body was a field of consciousness aligned with the underlying source of reality. A man who didn't use technology because he himself was the instrument, a transmitter and receiver of information encoded in the fabric of the universe. Can you see it? Could you see Jesus not as a mere prophet, but as a point of convergence between the human and the cosmic, between the individual and the collective, between time and eternity? Because this idea isn't new. It's been present since the earliest days of Christianity, embedded in symbols, myths, and narratives that were often taken too literally. But what was lost in this process was the deeper essence of the message, that Jesus didn't come to save us from the outside. He came to remind us of who we are, that we too carry within us the same spark, the same capacity, the same connection to the primordial field of existence. How many times have you felt that something inside you knew more than your mind could grasp? That there was an answer within you but you couldn't put it into words? That sometimes your choices seemed guided by an invisible force, as if the universe were conspiring to show you something? Jung would call this synchronicity. The ancients called it divine will. Today, some scientists call it the quantum field. But perhaps it is all the same thing, the manifestation of a greater intelligence operating beyond time and space, one we all access in some way. And maybe Jesus was the first to live this consciously, the first to not only feel the connection but express it with complete freedom. If that's true, the question becomes, what about us? To what extent are we blocking our own ability to access this energy, to touch the infinite with human hands, to walk on the waters of doubt, fear, and insecurity, and transform them into steady steps toward the light? Have you ever considered that the figure of Jesus, as passed down through the centuries, might be far more than a simple religious story? That behind the parables, miracles, and seemingly simple words, there was a code, a hidden pattern we are only now beginning to decipher through the lens of modern science. Imagine if he came not just as a messenger of an invisible kingdom, but as a translator between two realities, the physical and the spiritual, between the visible and the invisible, between thought and matter. What if, instead of miracles, We were talking about natural laws not yet fully understood. Laws like those governing the quantum field, where intention can influence the behavior of matter, where consciousness seems to play a fundamental role in collapsing possibilities into concrete reality. Does this sound familiar? Maybe because you felt it, not as doctrine or dogma, but as a sensation, that inner certainty that there's something greater at work behind the appearance of things, that your emotions, your thoughts, your very presence can alter the environment around you. How many times have you walked into a room and felt a heavy energy without knowing why? Or been near someone so vibrant they seem to change the atmosphere? This isn't just subjective perception, it's physics in action. After all, what we call reality is made of vibration, frequency, and information. What if Jesus knew this? What if he didn't just know it but lived in that frequency with complete naturalness? Let's look at other cultures, other ancient myths. In Greece, we had Apollo, the god of light and healing, capable of restoring balance through harmony. In Egypt, Thoth, the guardian of cosmic knowledge, who wrote the destinies of men in the stars. In India, Krishna, who danced on the waters while teaching Arjuna about the higher self and the illusion of the material world. In Norse mythology, Odin, who walked between worlds, seeking wisdom in the deepest mysteries, even sacrificing himself for knowledge. These figures weren't just mythological gods, they were archetypal representations of elevated states of consciousness. Universal patterns that appear in some form across all cultures, suggesting there's a common blueprint underlying human experience. And Jesus? Where does he fit in? Perhaps as the pinnacle of this symbolic journey, as the point of convergence for all these archetypes, a man who spoke as a teacher, acted as a healer, taught as a philosopher, suffered as a human, and transcended as a universal symbol. Someone who experienced the ultimate duality, divinity and humanity, individual consciousness and cosmic connection, death and rebirth. And perhaps that was why his image remains so powerful, because it carries within it all the elements needed to awaken something deep within us, something that goes beyond religion, something that touches our innermost psychological structure. How many times have you felt you needed to die to be reborn? Not literally, of course, but symbolically. At some point, you had to let go of an old version of yourself, limiting beliefs, toxic relationships, destructive habits, to make room for something new. And in those moments there was pain, fear, uncertainty. But something greater emerged too. A new perspective. A previously dormant strength. This is what many call resurrection. Not just a historical or theological event, but an inner process of transformation. And perhaps Jesus lived this consciously, showing us that death isn't the end, but a transition. That true life begins when we move beyond what we know. What if this idea is more than symbolic? What if it's literal on some level we don't yet understand? Quantum physics already questions the linearity of time. It suggests the future can influence the past, that particles can be connected regardless of distance, that consciousness may play an active role in shaping reality. What if Jesus, in some way, understood this? What if he wasn't just a man with exceptional gifts, but someone resonating at a frequency that allowed direct access to the deeper layers of existence? A man who didn't manipulate reality with technology, but with pure presence, with unshakable intention, with unconditional love. It's a bold idea, I know, but think about it. If reality is shaped by perception, and perception is filtered by consciousness, then whoever masters their consciousness might also master reality. And Jesus always emphasized this. He never said, "I am unique." He said, "You are God's too." He said, "What I do, you will do also, and even greater things." Provocative? Perhaps, but also deeply liberating. Because if this is true, we're not talking about an external savior, but an internal mirror. An invitation for each of us to awaken what's always been there, buried under layers of fear, conditioning, and distraction. So, what's the next step? What do you do with this idea? Simple. Start living it. Start realizing that your choices, emotions, and thoughts aren't just random events. They're acts of creation. That every word you speak, every act of love, every moment of presence is a way to align with this greater field. And maybe, like Jesus, you'll discover you don't need dramatic miracles to transform your life. You just need to reconnect with the source within you. The same source that moved rivers, healed bodies, and calmed storms. The same source that, according to tradition, said, that all may be one, as I and the Father are one. Have you ever felt that, upon hearing those words, something inside you resonates, not as doctrine but as remembrance, as if, on some deep level of your existence, you already knew this? That separation is an illusion. That love is the most fundamental force in the universe. That consciousness isn't just a byproduct of the brain, but part of a larger, interconnected, eternal field. And perhaps that is exactly what Jesus came to show. That divinity isn't out there on a celestial throne, but here, in every heartbeat, in every breath of your soul, in every choice you make for compassion, forgiveness, and truth. Because if he truly lived connected to this field, it wasn't because he was special. It was because he awakened to something we all carry but many have forgotten. What if this is the greatest prophecy of all? Not a cataclysmic prediction or a date marked in the heavens, but a silent, constant revelation that we're all destined to wake up, to reconnect, to remember who we are, where we came from, and our role in this cosmic web. Can you feel it? That inner restlessness, that longing for more meaning, more connection, more authenticity? Know that this isn't emptiness. It's a call. The entire universe, through you, asking to be heard. And perhaps this is why we've reached a time when science is starting to confirm what the ancients knew intuitively, that there is an underlying intelligence to reality, a pattern, a hidden harmony, a unique frequency vibrating behind everything that exists. Quantum physics, for instance, no longer speaks of isolated particles but of fields of possibility, of invisible relationships, of observers influencing what they observe. Does that sound familiar? Does it remind you of something else? Perhaps something Jesus said. Whatever you ask in prayer, believing you will receive. Prayer here, not as a repetitive ritual, but as conscious intention. Believing, not as dogmatic adherence, but as vibrational alignment. And receiving, not as an external reward, but as an internal manifestation. Because if the universe is made of information, energy, and consciousness, then what we call miracles might simply be the result of someone aligned with the right frequency, someone who understood the language of the cosmos before we even had words to describe it. What if that's true? If Jesus had access to that language, if he knew reality was malleable, that the mind influences the physical world, and that faith is the bridge between the possible and the realized, then maybe we're not talking about a supernatural man, but someone who lived naturally in tune with the deepest laws of existence. A man who didn't need technology because he himself was the instrument. A human transmitter of pure love, whose presence altered states of consciousness, healed bodies, and even physical structures. And if that's true, the question remains, what about us? To what extent are we blocking our own ability to tap into this field, to access this source, to live in sync with the energy that moves the universe? How many times have you felt you could go further? That there was more within you, but something held you back? Fear, conditioning, limiting beliefs, the social pressure to act rationally, efficiently, productively. When deep down, what you wanted was to feel, to connect, to be. And perhaps this is Jesus's greatest lesson, that being present is the first step to healing. That love is the greatest technology we know. That pure intention, guided by the heart, can move mountains, and maybe even molecules. And if that's true, we don't need dramatic miracles to transform our lives. We just need small acts of courage, daily choices for truth, moments of silence to listen to what the soul already knows. What if I told you this path already exists within you, and all you need to do is remember it? Jung would call this the process of individuation. Mystics called it returning to the center. Scientists call it quantum coherence. But they're all talking about the same thing, the movement of coming home, of integrating what's been fragmented, of reconnecting with the source that lives within and beyond you. And perhaps this is Jesus' greatest message, that we re not just passengers in a random universe, we re co-creators, that the light isn't just in him but in us too, and that by looking inward we can find not just answers, but the very energy that shapes what is yet to come. So, what will you do with this? Will you keep searching outside? Keep trying to change the world without first changing yourself? Or will you accept the invitation? The invitation to dive into the depths of your own consciousness, to face your shadows, integrate your opposites, and discover that deep down you were never separate, that you were always connected, that you always had access, that you were always part of what we call divine. And perhaps in doing so, you'll find you don't need miracles written in sacred books, because you yourself can become one, a walking miracle, a translator between worlds, a manipulator of quantum energy, not with equipment or formulas, but with presence, love, and intention. If you've made it this far, watching this video to the end, perhaps you've already realized it wasn't by chance. Maybe every word you've heard has struck a chord within you, awakened something dormant, made you feel there's more life, more purpose, more connection. And maybe now you're wondering, what do I do with all this? How do you apply these ideas in practice? How do you start walking this path without losing your way? The answer, paradoxically, is simple. Start with yourself. Start with silence, with inner listening, with the courage to look at what you'd rather ignore. Because true growth doesn't come from external techniques or methods. It comes from an honest encounter with your own shadow, from a daily commitment to authenticity, from small acts of courage repeated with consistency. The most important thing isn't what you learn here, it asks what you do with it. Because true knowledge is only complete when it becomes action, when it transforms into life, when it manifests in the way you breathe, love, create, and choose to exist. So are you ready? Ready to hear the voice of your soul? Ready to come home?